They say every family carries a few buried stories, tales meant to fade with time, whispered between generations like dying embers. But some secrets don't fade. They fester. They reshape the blood itself. And when you trace them back far enough, you start to realize that maybe that family should never have been. The archive that surfaced in 1997 was supposed to be routine: land deeds, census records, marriage certificates from a small township in Virginia. But what the archivist found inside one mislabeled folder wasn't paperwork. It was a single, handwritten confession, and the name on it matched 10 generations of the same family. A name that appeared again and again, long before the person it belonged to was ever born. The letter began with just 6 words: "We were never meant to continue." No date, no location, just the family seal, pressed in black wax, brittle with age. Every attempt to verify its authenticity led nowhere. The county courthouse burned in 1891, the church records were missing, and the land the family once owned is gone, swallowed by a flood that left no survivors. Officially. Hello everyone, before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. But the bloodline did continue. You can trace it through marriage records, property transfers, even military drafts. 10 generations of the same lineage, each one marrying younger, dying stranger. Every census year, the family grew smaller. Every decade, the town around them grew quieter, as if people simply moved away to forget them. Locals still talk about the hollow near Redford Creek, where the original farmhouse once stood. They say on fog-heavy nights, you can still see the light burning in the upper window, though no structure remains. The foundation was dug out in the 1960s, yet the glow persists, a pulse in the dark earth. When investigators cross-reference the family's genetic records, what little remains, they found something no one could explain. A pattern in the DNA sequence, repeating perfectly across 2 centuries, like a signature that refuses to fade. Scientists call it an anomaly. The family called it the mark. Whatever it was, it's the reason they kept the secret buried. The reason the letter warned, "We were never meant to continue." And it's the reason we're telling their story tonight. The story of the Harrows begins, as most American tragedies do, with the promise of land. In 1793, a man named Elias Harrow purchased 200 acres of forest in what was then the edge of Virginia's frontier. The deed lists him as first of his line, though there is no record of his arrival, no ship manifest, no baptism, no trace before that year. It's as if Elias Harrow simply appeared, fully grown, with a wife, 2 sons, and a name that would outlive them all. Neighbors described him as polite but cold. He built his house at the base of Redford Creek, too close to the water for comfort. The soil there was dark and rich, but every farmer in the county avoided it. They said the ground sank when stepped upon, soft like something breathing just below. Still, Harrow insisted it was blessed earth, calling it his inheritance from the deep. His wife, Miriam, was seen less and less as the years went on. She bore 4 children, though only 2 appear in official records. One was stillborn, the midwife claimed. Another, no one will say. Local stories tell of a child born without eyes, who spoke before he drew breath. There's no proof of this, of course. Just the kind of tale that grows around a family that keeps its doors locked in daylight. In 1808, Elias's oldest son, Nathaniel, inherited the farm. The records list Elias as deceased, but there's no grave, no obituary, no marker in the churchyard. Some say his body was buried on the property, sealed beneath the house he built. Others whisper that it was never found at all, that he walked into the forest one evening and never came out. Nathaniel's generation saw the first incident. The creek flooded one spring, tearing away half the property. When the water receded, the soil near the house had changed. It was gray, almost ashen, and it stank of metal. The livestock that grazed there died within days. Nathaniel petitioned the town to move, but the local pastor refused to bless the land. He told the family their roots ran too deep. By 1825, the Harrow name had already become a quiet warning in town. Travelers said the family's children looked too similar, same eyes, same voice, as though each generation were only one face wearing new skin. And when the census taker arrived that year, he noted something odd beside Nathaniel's name, 2 small words, circled twice in red ink, still here. By the 4th generation, the Harrows had become a ghost presence in their own town. The Civil War passed them by. No records of enlistment, no destruction, nothing touched them. It was as if the war itself refused to cross Redford Creek. But isolation does strange things to a family. The letters from that era, what few survived, speak in fragments. Words like return, atonement, and one that appears again and again, the keeper. In 1869, a traveling priest named Father Dorian visited the region to bless farmland ruined by flooding. His journal was found decades later, water-stained and half-burned. One entry stands out. It reads, "They keep the boy in the cellar. He hums without breath." The mother calls it the gift. The next page is torn. The one after that simply says, "I saw the mark." After that visit, the priest vanished. The church sent word that he'd succumbed to fever on the road, but no death certificate was ever filed. What was filed, however, was a birth record, dated 3 months later, another Harrow. The mother's name was Sarah, the father's listed as Elias, the same Elias from 1793. At first glance, it could have been a clerical error, an old name recycled through generations. But when researchers compared signatures across centuries, the handwriting matched. Perfectly, same slant, same looping R. Even the ink used in later documents showed traces of the same rare iron compound found only in pigments from the early 1800s. You can dismiss a lot as coincidence. But handwriting doesn't lie. Neither does blood. A medical examiner, one of the few to gain access to a surviving Harrow body in the early 20th century, described something that never made it into the official report. The man's organs were mirrored, reversed like a reflection. The heart on the right side, the liver on the left. Entirely functional, yet wrong in every conceivable way. And here's what chills me most. The examiner noted a small, circular scar at the base of the neck, an old wound, perfectly centered. The same mark described by Father Dorian 60 years earlier. The same mark that appeared in every generation thereafter. The Harrows called it the gate. Whatever it opened to, they kept it in the family. By the early 1900s, Redford Creek was a dead town. The mill closed, the church rotted, and only the Harrow property remained. Locals said the place breathed wrong. Thick fog always pooled there first, and the air never felt clean. But the strangest thing wasn't the land. It was how the family refused to leave, even as everything around them turned to ruin. The 8th generation lived through the Great Depression. Jacob Harrow, his wife Ruth, and their 3 children. Census records list the 2 eldest as unaccounted for by 1934. Missing, not dead. The youngest, a boy named Samuel, survived. He's the one the government sent a team to interview in 1951 because of what he'd seen and what he'd written in his notebooks. They were found decades later in a condemned barn, wrapped in oilcloth. The pages are filled with symbols, hand-drawn spirals, sequences of numbers, and crude diagrams of human anatomy. But between them are sentences written again and again in a trembling hand. He comes through the mirror. Investigators thought Samuel was describing hallucinations. But one of them, Agent Renner, added a private note to his own file, dated October 12, 1952. It read, "Observed light in cellar window, site abandoned since 1939. Can't explain possible reflection, but from what?" After that, Renner's report ends abruptly. 2 pages are missing. His signature doesn't appear again in bureau records. When the farmhouse finally collapsed in 1964, the county ordered the foundation excavated for safety. What they found shouldn't have been possible. Beneath the main structure were 10 chambers, one for each recorded generation. Inside each, a sealed glass jar filled with a dark liquid that still resists chemical identification. In each jar, a single tooth, all molars human, all identical. The state sealed the site, calling it an archaeological anomaly. The jars disappeared from evidence the following year, yet somehow the Harrow bloodline continued. DNA from an unmarked grave in 1983 matched a known Harrow descendant exactly, 100%. No genetic drift, no mutation, as though the blood had been frozen in time, and in that same year another birth record appeared. The child's surname Harrow, the father's name again, Elias. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Because this is where the story starts to turn. By 1997, most of what was left of the Harrow story lived in fragments. Whispers among archivists, burned microfilm, and families who didn't like to talk about their neighbors. But that was the year everything resurfaced. The archivist's name was Ellen Price. She worked at the Virginia Historical Society, cataloging rural land deeds from the 19th century. Her discovery began with a water-stained ledger from Redford County, sealed for privacy. Inside was the letter you heard about before, the one that began with, "We were never meant to continue." But Ellen didn't stop there. She cross-referenced the names, followed the trail of land transfers and death records until she found something that didn't belong, a modern signature dated 1994. Elias Harrow. The man had filed a property claim in Tennessee, an old farmhouse built near a creek with the same name, Redford. Ellen drove down to see it. Her colleague said she was obsessed, that she stopped sleeping, that she'd started wearing gloves to work because her hands itched when she touched paper. In her private notes, found later in her apartment, she described hearing something while sorting the Harrow records. A faint hum, the same phrase from the old priest's journal, hums without breath. She visited the Tennessee site on October 3rd. Her last audio log is only 7 minutes long. You can hear wind, insects, and what sounds like a steady tapping on wood. Then she speaks. "There's light in the window. No power here. No reflection. It's the same house. Same angles. It shouldn't be standing. But it is." The recording ends with a single word, whispered as though someone stood beside her again. Her car was found a mile down the road. Door open, engine cold. Inside, the family seal, pressed into fresh black wax, rested on the dashboard. No fingerprints. That farmhouse was bulldozed 2 weeks later, but the man who operated the machinery quit halfway through. He told police the house bled from the foundation. They laughed at him until the second operator reported the same thing. Both men left town. Ellen Price was never found. But a month later, the society received a package in the mail, no return address. Inside, a single page from that same letter, now written in new ink, "Why we're never meant to continue. But we always do." In the years that followed, the Harrow story faded back into rumor, buried beneath bureaucracy and fear. The official explanation was hoax, of course. The Tennessee property was written off as a squatter's reconstruction. The blood anomalies were sealed in university archives. Ellen Price became another missing name in a long list of archivists who got too curious about the wrong century. But those who've handled the evidence firsthand, they don't sleep easy. A retired bureau researcher, identified only as R.J., broke silence in 2008. He'd worked on the Redford Creek excavation, and he claimed that before the jars were seized, they ran one final test. Each contained a strand of hair. The DNA didn't just match across generations. It was identical, sequence for sequence, with the exception of one repeating code, a pattern of 10 nucleotides looping endlessly. Like a lock that refuses to open, he called it the recursion. When the Bureau's internal report surfaced briefly online, it included a footnote referencing something called Subject E, the last confirmed Harrow, male, early 40s, last seen in Kentucky 2004. The report describes a neurological calm, a complete absence of fear response, and an unusual reflection phenomenon. Cameras could capture his image only once, and in the photo he's not looking at the lens, he's looking past it. Some think Subject E was the final Harrow, but there are birth records, unverified, unclaimed, that keep surfacing every decade. Children born under aliases that trace back to the same genetic signature. They move around the country, never staying long. When they die, their bodies vanish before burial. There's a rumor among genealogists that the Harrow name is cursed to survive. Not blessed, not chosen, cursed to keep existing until the original debt is repaid. The problem is, no one knows what that debt was. And maybe that's the point. Some secrets aren't about what was done. They're about what was made. If you trace the Harrow DNA far enough, the sequence doesn't lead back to Europe or Africa or any known lineage. It leads nowhere. It simply stops, like the beginning was erased. Tonight I want you to think about that. How something can walk the earth with no origin, no creator, no first breath, just continuation. 10 generations, one secret, a family that shouldn't exist. And still, somewhere, they do. Some nights, when the fog thickens along the creeks of Appalachia, people still report a light, faint golden, pulsing like a heartbeat through the trees. It's always in the same place, always where the Harrows once stood. They say if you follow it, you start to hear a hum, low and steady, like breath drawn through glass. And if you get close enough, you see your own reflection in the light, smiling before you do. That's how the story ends, or how it begins again. The genealogists who came after Ellen Price tried to seal the records permanently, labeling them folkloric contamination, but digital copies spread before they could delete them all. The letter, the recordings, the photo of Subject E, they circulate now in forums, late-night archives, and private servers under 100 names. But the pattern is always the same. Every person who studied the Harrows for more than a week reports the same dream. A door in the ground, 10 locks, and a voice on the other side whispering, "Still here." There's an unconfirmed detail, something passed quietly among archivists, that the recursion in the Harrow DNA sequence isn't just a biological loop. When mapped as sound, those 10 repeating nucleotides form a frequency, barely audible to the human ear, but when amplified, it produces a tone identical to the hum described in every record since 1869. It's not random. It's not mutation, it's memory. Some believe the Harrows were a ritual gone wrong, an attempt to bind something eternal into human flesh. Others say they were the vessel for something older, something that feeds on replication itself. Whatever the truth, it has learned to hide inside us, because when modern genealogists ran that DNA pattern through national databases, they found partial matches, thousands of them. That's right, thousands. Not all identical, but close enough. Too close. Maybe that's why some families never talk about where they came from. Why old houses seem to hum at night. Why, when you stare too long into a mirror, your reflection sometimes lags just a heartbeat behind. The Harrow bloodline wasn't supposed to continue. And maybe it didn't. Maybe it just found new names, new faces, new vessels. So if you ever find an old letter sealed in black wax, don't open it. Don't read it aloud. And if you hear a faint humming behind you as you turn away, don't look back. Because some families don't die. They just wait to be remembered.